everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson, and today we are joined by one of our very first guests, one of our original friends of the show. You know him from everything from The Shape of Water to The Ghost That Ate Us to Angel Down to Whale Fall. His latest book is a nonfiction exploration of George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead. It's called Partially Devoured. It's great. Daniel Kraus, welcome back to the show.
Oh, of course, I'm glad to be back.
It's great to have you back. We've been talking about doing a Night of Living Dead deep dive, I think, since the first time you were on the show,
Probably,
uh,
yeah.
which is when I first heard about Partially Devoured happening. So it's been a minute, but I'm glad you're here. I want to start just before we get lost in Romero stuff, which I know we will.
Mhm.
I want to ask up front, Whale Fall movie,
Yeah.
almost here. How are you feeling?
Oh, I feel really good about it. Like I've felt good. I've had a good feeling about it the whole way. And then when I started seeing cuts of it a few months ago, any any concerns I might have had went out the window. Like I think it's a really, really good movie. I think Brian Duffield, the director and my co-writer, just knocked it out of the park. I can't imagine a better version of it.
Yeah, it is out in October, just in time for Halloween. I personally am hoping that it will screen here in Austin at Fantastic Fest, but we won't know that until we know it. But I will be there, front row, regardless, whenever I get to see it. I do want to ask because I love Brian's work. We're lucky enough to be mutuals with him on social media, so I've kind of been able to chat with him about certain things at times, and one day he will be on this show. I promise. We'll make it happen. But what did he bring as a co-writer to and working with him in Whalefall and shaping that story cinematically that you maybe weren't expecting to get?
He's just got really good instincts. Um, he, right from our very first conversations, he would have just sort of, just sort of musing aloud, like, what if we started like this? And what if we took these three scenes and these three flashbacks and combined them into one like this? And they were just really, really good. It's easily the best collaboration I've ever had with anyone. Like it was just really, really super functional when we were writing it, it was, and I think I can fairly say this held true on both ends. I would write a scene or two or three and send it to him, and he was always happy to get them. And it's like, okay, well, this works, and he'd send it to me, and I would feel the same way. I think, okay, well, this is really going well. It helps, of course, to have a roadmap like the book, where at least for the stuff inside the whale, we kind of knew there wasn't much to mess with as far as the order of things because there's nothing else you can do. I exhausted the possibilities sort of what you can do inside of a whale. So there was a certain straightforwardness with the whale stuff, but that didn't mean there weren't complications and things we had to move around. And then the everything with the flashbacks, that was a lot of work or a lot of brain work anyway, because there's 100 of them in
Yeah.
the book and the movie, might have five, or six or something like that. So it was how to get the maximum impact out of those was the biggest challenge probably.
So I first talked to you about Partially Devoured. I think we mentioned it when you were here talking about Pay the Piper a while back,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
uh you and I did a pretty substantial little interview tied to a feature that I was writing for the spring issue of Fangoria, which is available now on newsstands. Listeners, go get it. I talked to you. I talked to Suze Romero. I talked to oh god, I'm blanking on his name, the head of the George A. Romero
Jeff
Foundation,
Whitehead.
Jeff Whitehead, who was lovely, and Pittsburgh Pirates fans, I think, universally are lovely because
Oh, of
they have
course.
such optimism. Uh, sorry, Jeff,
Okay.
but no, we did a really nice little piece on it, but I had a word count limit, so much
Mhm.
of that that we talked about didn't make it in. So this might be a repeat question for you,
Mhm.
but I don't want to ask you about the first time you saw Night of the Living Dead because you cover that in the book. I do want to ask you, when was the first time in your uh experience with the film that you looked at it and went, "Oh, this is like really important to who I am. This isn't
Oh,
just a movie that I like. This is a thing that really matters to me."
there's probably a couple different answers to that. I mean, when I'm, and the book covers this too, humorously, but when I made my teenage adaptation of it, when I was, I don't know, 15 or whatever it was with my friends, and we screened that at a lot of the events that I did for Partially Devoured. That in some way was a tip off, probably to me, that this movie meant something, that it was one of the things that as soon as I figured out how to use a video camera, I was like, oh, we need to make Night of the Living Dead. So I probably didn't overthink that, but that was clearly a signifier of it. I know when I was in college and doing a sort of honors project, which was a screenplay, and and this was before the zombie renaissance. This is before 28 Days Later and all that stuff. Um, my honors project was a screenplay that was sort of a quasi sequel, a very, very serious um, quasi sequel to Night of the Living Dead. And some of that material, which I always liked, was repurposed and put into The Living Dead, the novel of Ramirez that I finished after he died. So that was, I think, around that time. So that would have been like 1998 or so, was probably the time that I realized that this stuff is really, this movie specifically is floating around in my brain in a way that I feel like I need to respond to it in some way, which there's a lot of art you sort of absorb, but there's not much that you feel I want to make a direct response to this. And so that sort of screenplay was my first response to it. And then there's a lot of other things now that I've done that have been in conversation with it in a serious way.
Yeah, it's and to be clear, listeners, we're just kind of jumping in and we're going to talk about Partially Devoured and Night of the Living Dead at the same time because Partially Devoured is about Night of the Living Dead. So there's not going to really be a division here between topic and current work of the guest. I think that's pretty obvious, but just to put it out there. You also said something really interesting in the early pages of this book that I, as someone who's constantly buying horror movie t-shirts, found interesting, which is that you do not buy merch, but you buy
No.
Night of the Living Dead merch.
Yeah.
I I just I want to know what the drive behind that is, because I mean I it feels to me like reading you talk about it, it felt like it's almost something sort of talismanic for you, but
Right.
it's not something in my headspace. I'm like, if I like a thing, I'm just gonna keep getting versions of that thing.
Hmm.
So what? Explain that.
Yeah, I'm definitely not a merch buyer in the sense that like I don't have um I don't have merch. I don't have the kind of tchotchkes that people buy that you'd see at like fan conventions and stuff. The big and only exception is Night of the Living Dead, where I have just Night of the Living Dead everything. Um, and I think I'm sure the book deals with it a little more poetically than I'm going to now, but I think I make the comparison that I also don't have pictures all over my house of like family and deceased loved ones and stuff. And I wonder if that kind of stuff is, for whatever reason, good or bad, is a little too much for me. It's a little too directly powerful to me. And Night of the Living Dead is sort of a substitution for that. That it having that stuff around me, and I'm just gazing around my room right now and looking at it, it somehow is like having a picture of my mom who introduced it to me, or the friends who I watched it with all the time with in middle school or high school, um, and so on. It is something familiar to me. Like I think, some people when they put up Christmas decorations, it's their favorite thing of the year. Like it's like it remind yes,
Yep. Hello, that's me.
decoration, yeah. It like reminds you of something. You're like, I'm putting up the tree and the garland, and it reminds me of times with my family and excitement of Christmas morning. I think it's sort of like that for me. Like it just puts me in a mood of happy nostalgia and not sad nostalgia.
Yeah, which is interesting. I think that speaks to there's a lot of talk now in the horror world about comfort watches
Mm.
and the idea of a comfort watch being this very disturbing, very dark, very bleak thing. You know, people whose comfort watches are something like the Blair Witch Project or Saw or Hellraiser, uh, that I think is you just sort of laid out why that is, because it does, when I watch Hellraiser for one example, like I know that it is this gross, dark movie about demons who rip you apart with fishhooks, but it's also like, oh, I remember when I watched this movie with my high school girlfriend, and it freaked her
Right.
out, and I liked that it freaked her out, and it was just kind of this fun being the horror kid. It was one of my first moments feeling like I'm the horror kid, and the other people
Yeah.
around me think that's weird and kooky, and that's fun
Yeah,
for me.
yeah.
So yeah, that's one of these days I want to like look at your entire merch collection, because as someone who has a George Romero action figure somewhere in this house, I'm still
Uh-huh.
unpacking from the move, but that's fun for
Well,
me.
there's, one of the major conclusions of the book is that, when I most needed it, like when in the toughest years of my life, probably like sort of in middle school time, it brought me a lot of strength. Like it was the inroad to the horror genre, which I partook in. Is that a word?
Yep.
Partook in massively during that time where I was watching everything from Faces of Death up and down. Uh, and it was like armor. I was building a suit of armor for myself and mastering fear in a way that maybe I couldn't do it in with people at school in the light of day, but I was hammering away at it. So I do think there's also that, like, Night of the Living Dead stuff is sort of almost a badge of that. Like I did master that early type of fear, and it continues. I continue to master other types of fear, or try to. And Night of the Living Dead reminds me of that.
So this is leading me to something I don't think I got to ask you about before, but that I want to ask you about, which is the way this book is structured and how it works narratively. Because the interesting thing about Partially Devoured is it's a beat by beat analysis slash history of Night of the Living Dead. So when you read it, listeners, you will be, there are time codes, so you can look at individual shots and moments and go, okay, here's what's happening on screen. Here's what Daniel thinks about it, and here's factoids about how it was made, why it sounds like that, why it looks like that, uh, and so on. But it's also this wonderful piece of memoir in which you talk about your mom introducing you to this kind of stuff. You talk about some pretty hard times that you suffered where Night of the Living Dead was there for you and helped you through. And in the subtitle of the book, you say saved your life. Um, and I know that you started this book on kind of a lark, just sitting down and playing the film and writing about it as it played. Um, what was the revision process like in order to kind of get all the through lines together? Because you do have analysis, history,
Mhm.
memoir all running at the same time.
Yeah, the revision process was extensive for sure. Like the basic shape of it never really changed. Like uh, basically, I cover the things I cover when I do the same way in the finished book that I do in the first book. Like basically, I just followed my instincts, and they basically were proven out to be true. But the book probably got a third bigger, like. But once I had the shape, it became a little easier that okay, I've just come up with this entire new thread of research that I hadn't thought about. I now know where to put it, like because I know at time code 32 minutes that I discussed something sort of like this, so I could sort of tangent off that. And it was a process of doing that over and over and over and over as I continued to find out new things and have new thoughts. And most of them were minor that I could pepper in at the right spots. Some of them were major, and they involved adding a bunch of stuff to a bunch of sections. But it was never that difficult after the long period of the first draft. It was never that difficult to figure out where they should go, because I had laid out again at this point so many potential inroads. But it's a process I haven't stopped. Like I have a document that's all the stuff that I've learned since the book. I had to hand the book in that I'd love to put into a second edition.
Yeah, I would love an expanded edition of Partially Devoured. But let's talk about the film a little bit because I went back. I've seen Night of the Living Dead. I don't know how many times at this point. It's been a lot. I went in last night to rewatch it before we talked, and sort of came to some new revelations about how it affects me, and I think some of that is driven by your book, and some of that is driven by this is probably the first time I've watched it in at least 5 or 6 years. One is how long it takes for anything to happen.
Oh yeah.
Um, which I think that when it comes to movies like Night of the Living Dead that are so revered and influential, we as horror fans, or at least as young horror fans, like I remember the first time I watched this movie, I was levitating. I was so excited to finally see the granddaddy of them all, of zombie films. And I don't think I noticed how patient the movie
Hmm.
is in those opening minutes because it takes so long for that car to get to the cemetery, and then it takes so long for uh Barbara and Johnny to do much of anything, to the point that when Barbara kneels down in front of the grave, Johnny is like, okay, let's move, let's get a move
Yeah.
on, let's
Right.
let's do something now. um what do you make of that patience? Is that
Mhm.
amateur filmmakers being amateur filmmakers, or is that a deliberate sort of trying to lull you in until that zombie number one finally reaches out?
I think it's a combination of those things. And I credit this to another Romero scholar, Adam Hart, but he was responsible for digging up some information that is in my book too about this play called The Connection. And I don't remember the playwright's name right now, but there was a movie directed of it too by Shirley Clark, I think. It was, and many people think it's the very first found footage movie, but it was based on a play where it's a bunch of people waiting around for their dealer to show up. And there was a production of it in Pittsburgh, and Romero had a big role in it as an actor. And I think that movie really stuck with him. And it's a bunch of people waiting around for something to happen and arguing with each other. And it very much feels like Night of the Living Dead. It's just that Night of the Living Dead has a peppering of zombies in it, particularly at the beginning and at the end. But in the middle, Night of the Living Dead is basically a play. And so you see how easily, in the book, I track all the various, not only kind of movie redos of it, but all the theatrical versions of it. There's musicals and comedies, and there's an opera even. And it makes a lot of sense because it is essentially a one location, people arguing with each other type of movie. So I think he was whether or not he was making a horror movie or not, that's what kind of appealed to him is that idea of this sort of pressure cooker or meat grinder where everyone's stuck in this little room and sort of shredding themselves against each other, completely regardless of what is going on outside. It could have been zombies, it could have been giant ants, it could have been anything. The point is how that makes the people inside the house on the stage in the play, how it makes those characters reveal themselves.
I think this is something too that we talked about when you were here for Pay the Piper. Is Romero was not necessarily a horror guy from a fan perspective. Not that he didn't enjoy horror films ever, but he was very much a sort of polyglot in terms of his cinematic diet. And when I talked to Suze, his widow, she said, "Oh, he used to show me John Ford films all the time and Howard Hawks films all the time. He loved westerns, he loved musicals, he loved all of these different genres, and he wanted to make them. He just never got to."
Yeah.
And looking at Night of the Living Dead through that lens and through the lens that you were just talking about, you see that sort of theatrical element, but you also, like, to me, it feels like High Noon or Rio Bravo
Yes.
almost, especially, when Ben shows up and is like, we have to take charge and do something. And all of the townsfolk, which is to say the other people in the house, are like, are you sure we should do it that way? What if we did it this way? This is
Yeah.
actually better and safer. And you have the overly cautious guy and the foolhardy guy and the shell-shocked woman who can't keep up with what's going on. And it all feels very sort of, it feels like his Rio Bravo.
It does, and I never had made that comparison, and I particularly like the comparison to High Noon. I think that's a really interesting way to think about it because you do have this, it is sort of this moral sort of testing ground that's very unclear. I think it's maybe a little clearer in High Noon than Night of the Living Dead, but I
Yeah.
think it's a good comp for it that I haven't thought of.
Yeah, and I mean it's one of those things that's perfect for horror as well when you look at I mean, hell, it's not really a horror film; it's more of an action film. But you look at Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13,
Hmm.
which I know he was a Howard Hawks fan. It still is a Howard Hawks fan, like crazy. Um, and then it expands now into stuff like You're Next, and even we were talking about Brian, like Brian's movie No One Will Save You,
Sure.
about, but it's aliens in that case, and it's a gang of hoodlums in Carpenter's case, and it's zombies in Romero's case, but it all works within that, which I guess is a good way to transition into talking about single location horror,
Hmm.
um, which I know you're a fan of because last time we were here, we talked about a single location Twilight Zone episode. And you wrote an entire novel about a guy stuck in a whale's digestive system.
Hmm.
Uh, what other than like it makes good economic sense if you're going to make an
Yeah.
independent film and go like I really just need a house. If I have a
Hmm.
house, I can get most of this movie shot and we don't have to worry about other locations and mess with people. Um, but it also does so much dramatically because there's so much tension inherent in it. Just assuming this is the beginning of your love for single location horror, but what does Night of the Living Dead do with that that you feel like makes it stand out as a because there's so many great single
Yeah.
location horror films.
Right. And the Twilight Zone you referenced before was The Invaders,
The
that episode,
Invaders, yes,
which is kind of just like Night of the Living Dead,
it is.
except instead of zombies, it's these tiny little spacemen. But it all takes place in a farmhouse. And even with Dawn of the Dead, like he's increasing the size of his location, but again, it's just one location, really. It's a mall. And Day of the Dead, one location, underground military bunker. So he keeps on returning to it. It's yeah. So on the one hand, like you said, it sort of makes economic sense, but on the from an there's sort of a two perspectives, like from the maker and then the sort of beholder of it. From the maker point of it, I've always been drawn to these single location movies, regardless of whether they're horror or not, because it's like to me, it's like the ultimate test. Like you know, you may be a big time filmmaker, but who directed Bug? It was
William Friedkin.
William Friedkin. So you're William Friedkin. You know, you can do all sorts of stuff. But to say, okay, I'm gonna make this movie Bug that takes place all in someone's like living room or whatever, or even to a certain extent, Tarantino with The Hateful Eight. Like you know, you can do whatever you want, but like the test of a filmmaker in a way, or a writer, you know, if you're a novelist, is like, can I do it when I don't have all the tools and I've limited myself so much where I'm going to make a movie that somebody with just $100,000 could also make this movie. Like it's a proving ground. Do I really have it? If you remove the apparatus of car chases and drone shots and all these sort of other things that give you the sort of pizzazz and the production value, do you have the stuff? Do you really have the stuff to make it happen with just people's faces and a sort of neutral background? And so that's exciting. I think it's like all all sort of artists who work on a big canvas. I think it would keep them honest to occasionally have to do something like that. And from a viewer's point of view or a reader's point of view, in my case, um, it's I guess it's much the same. Where I want to see what you can do with a limited palette. And for me as a writer, I love limitations. Like nothing gets me more excited than limitations. Whether it's this whole thing takes place inside a whale's stomach, or sometimes it's aesthetic limitation, sometimes it's language limitation. Like with Angel Down, the whole thing's one sentence.
Yep.
Uh, what's that? What effect is that going to have? I have another book, Blood Sugar, that only uses certain kind of punctuation marks. All these things shove me into a corner. I love being painted into a corner and then having to be creative to get out of it. That's to me, that's what keeps things vital. And the single location horror movies is just a perfect example of that.
Another thing that is a running thread through your book, both through the way you analyze it and in all of the history that's dug up, is just how, and I'm using this word lovingly, I promise, just how amateurish the production is, and just how, and some of its appeal, I think, is when you're a first time making, when you're making your first feature film, and you're on a shoestring budget, and you're just kind of working with what you have. Like you said, limitations breed creativity. So there are things that happen in this film that, you look at them and you go, well, I wouldn't normally do it like that, but the reason they did it the way they did it is that was the only way they could do it. Like, I'm thinking in particular, I don't know why this struck me so hard last night, but there's a shot early on where Barbara goes into the house and finds the half-eaten corpse at the top of the stairs. And then Ben comes in and is trying to figure out what's going on, is asking Barbara, "Do you live here? Do you live here?" And then he goes up the stairs and sees what she saw and has this moment of understanding of why she is so freaked out and what's going on. And the camera does this weird thing where it almost looks like it's falling, where it was clearly like they had tilted up to look at Dwayne Jones on the stairs, and then he has to come back down to the bottom of the stairs to the hallway, and Judith O'Dea is leaning against a wall, just looking horrified. And the camera almost falls. It's such a quick tilt. It like slams down, and you see them there together.
Yeah,
And it was such a striking, like, oh, we're all coming back down to earth. Like, there is no real, because it's Ben having this moment of like, oh shit,
yeah,
okay, this is worse. I thought there was going to be some salvation here because, like he says, he pulled into the house hoping to use the gas pump, which is locked. Um, and now we're all like, okay, well, I'm in this together with this lady who's scared out of her mind. Um, what? Anyway, that's one example where I'm just like, I don't know that I've ever seen someone move a camera quite that jarringly and have it
no.
that be that effective. And that stuff is scattered all through the film. Like, I'm wondering if there's anything like that that you found in doing this writing that sort of doesn't fit in the context of conventional filmmaking that somehow works in Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, I'm sure there's the book probably lists several dozen of them. There's Yeah, and they kind of go into two categories, and one is the sort of category you just mentioned, where there's a camera movement or an edit or something that was done out of necessity. And I think there's more edits like that than anything, where I describe this moment in the book where Barbara turns around. She's at a window and she turns around and goes the other way. And I've never seen anyone turn around more with more ex I've never it's the most exciting turning around I've ever seen in my life. Like there's like five shots he edits in a scope of like 1 or 2 seconds just to turn her around. And I'm sure a lot of that, because why would you do that? A lot of that had to do with continuity. Like they grabbed some shots and they weren't quite right, and so to make it like flow left to right, they sort of had to throw in a bunch of shots to just make the logical connection of her turning around. But the effect of it is like this disorienting thing where it's like you kind of feel like Barbara at the moment. You don't know which way you're supposed to go. And the movie's filled with those things that are taking what essentially are band-aids and building something really beautiful out of the band-aids. I think given another opportunity, he doesn't make those choices because he gets it right the first time.
Yeah.
But there's something exciting about when you don't get it right and you have to figure it out. And comic writers, writers of comic issues will often talk about this kind of thing where they are comics they've loved, where someone got 200 issues into some arc and then realized, 100 issues ago made a mistake, and now they're locked into it, and now they have to find a way out of it. And now that ends up with some of the most creative ideas in all of comics because they're screwed now and have to come up with some sort of wild new way out of it. The second example of those kind of things in the movie are just mistakes, like bad camera moves, stutters in the tripods, and I love all those, and I point all of them out in the book, like these just sort of like bad pans where there's like a little skip in the middle that I just have become to me like fingerprints of the artists on them. Like you can literally see their hand on the tripod handle virtually because you see the bump they make when they didn't do it smoothly enough. A moment that I point out that I describe quite a bit in the book is when Barbara enters the den with all the animal heads, and there's supposed to be a swish pan, but apparently they didn't have room to do the second half of the swish pan. And so you see someone's fingers, if you slow it down enough, someone's fingers just move really quickly out from the camera. Um, and that's great because those are literally, in all likelihood, those are George Romero's fingers. It is like almost literally his fingerprints being shown on the film. And there are also moments that I talk about where I only by going frame by frame through the movie would anyone have ever seen them. Like whip pans that if you go frame by frame, there's suddenly a frame in the middle of it where you can see all the film equipment. And it's like this little hidden photograph of the crew that's been nested within this movie. And it's like this little gift. And so I love all the kinds of mistakes in the movie. In this particular movie, I've found reason to love.
It adds something to the urgency of it, I think, almost in a found footage way. The idea that like and all like you mentioned George's fingers, and it's funny because the film builds so many of its scares on hands grasping at people, and so it almost adds to the atmosphere. The idea that you can see a hand that's not supposed to be there, because none of those hands are supposed to be there in a
Right.
logical world. Um, Another thing that really so I'm on record. I wrote a piece for a site called Screen Invasion, probably a solid decade ago, about they were asking people the scariest horror movie they'd ever seen. And my answer for years was Night of the Living Dead because I grew up in essentially a farmhouse. Like my parents we lived on a cattle ranch in Central Texas. And so I grew up on this in this little ranch house in the country. And I had never seen, it was the first movie I ever saw that really captured the kind of darkness that happens when you live in a house in the middle of nowhere.
Totally.
Um, because when those ghouls come, they emerge from just this inky black that is remarkable that they were able to achieve it, knowing that they had to have lights out there to illuminate the ghouls in the first place. And it does such a good job of sort of depicting that halo of light around a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And so that used to freak me out because I would go outside at night and look off into the pasture and just see black and just be like anything could be out there about to walk into the light and show itself to me. So it's still one of the scariest movies I've ever seen, but the wild thing watching it last night was that it scares me for a different reason now. And
Totally. Yeah.
I think this is because of living through COVID and living through the Trump years, which is like you said, for much of the movie, it's a bunch of people in a house arguing. Another thing they're constantly trying to do, which is the same thing that we all did when COVID lockdown started, is get information.
Mhm.
They are scrambling for any scrap of information they can get that will explain what's happening and when help is coming. And that starts with the radio. And so the radio, sonically, this is the other thing. I was watching it with headphones on for the first time. Never done that before. You constantly hear the radio playing. The only time you don't really hear the radio, the newsreader on the radio, is in the cellar when you go down with the family in the cellar with the Coopers. Um, but otherwise, it's constant. Ben is trying to get information out of Barbara, and the radio is playing. Harry comes up and makes a fuss, and the radio is playing. Tom and Judy show up, and the radio is playing. And it's just this constant drone of like the same information over and over because it's the only information they have. And then the TV comes on when they finally get the TV working, and you get that amazing the speech, that get from which you get the title of your book, Partially Devoured, where the TV guy is finally telling you what's going on. And the scary thing about it is if you're an ordinary person and you turn on the TV and they tell you, like, hey, the dead are coming back to life and eating people. That's what's happening. We're not making this up. That is what's happening. We are living in that reality now. It just breaks your brain. And it's made worse by like the constant like ticker sounds in the newsroom behind that guy,
Yeah.
where they are just it's just this constant and it's designed to make you feel like you're going insane.
Yeah, it really reminds you of like, the 24 hours news cycle
Yeah.
because that didn't exist in 1967 when they made this, but um, it existed in times of major calamity. That's the only time the news would go 24/7. And that's what's happening in Night of the Living Dead. So it feels very familiar to us now because that's what we live with now constantly.
Yeah. It's so effective, and it's it's such a good way of delivering the plot. I mean, the bit where George has his cameo, where he's the newsman trying to get the government officials to answer questions while they're walking across the street. It very much feels like turning on the TV now and being assaulted by, well, shots were fired, but maybe they weren't fired, but we don't know who
Hmm.
fired them, but someone is hurt, but someone is not hurt. But
Yeah.
shooters, it's it does that so well. Um,
And I think back then, especially, sort of in the Cronkite era anyway, like you really wanted answers, yes or no, black and white answers from your news people, and not getting those, which you were really starting to not get those in the Vietnam era, was particularly unsettling. You'd always tune into the nightly news and they would tell you what's what. And now suddenly, and it's reflected in these news segments of Night of the Living Dead, you're getting information that negates other information that you've got. Like the radio tells you one thing, the guy on the TV comes on and says another thing. Later on, the TV guy says, "Remember that information we gave you earlier? Well, it's changed." And there's just this chaos that feels like today, where it's like, just like you said, there was a shooting. Well, was there a shooting? Well, who was the shooter? Well, is that really the political affiliation of the shooter? And all of these conclusions come out before anyone has a good handle on the truth,
I love the radio broadcast when he uses the specific word assassins.
right?
Because at the beginning, all they know is that anonymous people seem to be randomly attacking other people. And so they're just like, well, it's a mob of assassins. What else could it be? Particularly in the 1960s when a president had just been assassinated. That's a very evocative word. And then they have to come in later and go, like, no, it's not any kind of like targeted or planned thing. It's just mayhem.
I make a lot of hay out of the terminology that is used for
Yeah, yeah.
the zombies. Like they're called assassins. The script, I go through the script and I tell you all the weird ways that are described in the script. A bunch of terms that I don't think we even use anymore, like bow jobbers, and I mean like these weird words. And then of course, famously, they never say zombie; they call them ghouls. Ultimately, that's the term the radio and TV land on is ghouls. But what's so interesting is in Romero's archives, one of the last things he did before he died was he tried to write a new script in Night of the Living Dead, and that's not for a remake, but because the script that existed originally that he and John Russo wrote, um, it wasn't in what we know today as a screenplay format. It was this odd, almost more like short story type of form, and so he wanted there to be an actual script. So he was watching the movie and writing a script to align with the finished film in normal script format. And this was Romero near the end, and now he has a chance to name them. After all has been said and done, he gets his choice of what to call the zombies. And what he lands on very specifically with a capital letter is neighbors. He doesn't call them ghouls, doesn't call them
Uh,
zombies, he calls them neighbors, which I think is so telling about that tells you not only sort of what was on his mind when he made the movie originally, but what he wants to emphasize today is that the people you can't trust, they're not assassins, they're not ghouls, they're not zombies. They're what they really are is your neighbors.
Yeah, well, and I think that leads me into kind of the last big chunk of this that I want to talk about because like you wrote a whole book about Night of the Living Dead. We could be here all day. Uh, so, but we're not going to be because you're a busy man and you have lots of other stuff to do and another more books to write that I want to read. So, um, I want to talk about like that is the elephant in the room of Night of the Living Dead is the very clear social commentary that George. I mean, he used through his entire career. It's George A. Romero's body of work, at least in the horror genre, is always about the inherent savagery that we are all capable of bursting through the surface in one way or another. And that's true with the sequels to this. That's true with the Crazies. That's true with. I wrote a whole thing about the Dark Half once, where I talked about the
Hmm.
Dark Half is that, and here it takes the form of a very capable, smart black man in the 1960s butting up against these uppity white people, and in particular Harry. Like Harry is obviously the shit stirrer of the group, but these white people who don't want to listen to him either because they can't believe what's happening to them is real or because they're automatically convinced that they know better. And of course it ends famously with Ben's death, with the sheriff and his posse shooting Ben in the head simply because they see his head through a window. They don't take time to check and see. Ben doesn't speak. He just walks up to the window because he is, I mean, not to underline it too much, but there are a bunch of white people with guns outside. So naturally, Ben is a little like, am I safe? What's going on? And you wrote this at the end of the book. This is, I want to just read this bit from Partially Devoured because this is what I want to talk about. This is from the time code 1 hour, 33 minutes, and 38 seconds. So Ben has just been shot in the head. What we need from the next shot is solace. A look of horror on posse faces as they grasp their error. A shot of Ben beatific in the morning sun. If we are really airing our wish list here, a 1980s style slow motion montage of Ben's greatest hits or flashbacks of Ben holding his wife, playing with his kids, that sort of thing. We are fools to long for it. Romero has punished his characters for 93 minutes. He's not going to stop now. That is one of those things that I think traditionally, even now, audiences don't expect that, but I think we expect it more from horror films now than we did definitely in the production code era. But even like this is sort of to me the horror film that ushers in the 70s and the bleakness and darkness of things that like Wes Craven would do. I mean, Last House on the Left is kind of contemporary with Night of the Living Dead, so that's a little different. But what Wes Craven was doing, what John Carpenter did with the ending of Halloween, which isn't as bleak as Night, but has a similar sort of nothing here is fixed vibe. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is another one, and it's such a you go on in that same section of the book to talk about this being a portrait of America that has echoed down now for almost 60 years. Do you think Romero knew the full impact of that, or do you think it was more of a sort of exploitation cinema twist the knife thing to have those haunting shots in the credits of Ben's body being dragged away with meat hooks?
I think it was both. Like the movie they were going to make instead of Night of the Living Dead was called Wine of the Fawn, and it was this Bergman-esque sort of story about in the Middle Ages about this kind of young couple. It's actually pretty good. It's written in the same weird format as Night, but it's a good movie on paper, and it has almost the exact same ending as Night, where you don't where the main character is sort of offed at the last second. So I do think that there's an element of them that just wanted to be button pushers. They were like, oh, no one's going to see this coming. It's going to be startling. But it's also important to recognize that in the script of Night of the Living Dead, the script they shot, Barbara doesn't die. So they were killing off Ben, but they were letting Barbara live. And it was during the production that I think this sort of the mirror image of Johnny coming back and killing her occurred to them, and they were like, yeah, we should just kill everyone. So I do think there was an element of just them being like, this will, this will just be good a way to poke the audience in the eye and but you know there's the plan, and then there's what happens on set. And once Dwayne Jones showed up on set, I mean, just everything changed. Like all the dialogue in the script changed. Like all the dialogue that was attributed to Ben in the script was completely different, and was like this hillbilly hick dialogue that he was never going to say. And so he changed the complexion of the role from beginning to end, and he definitely knew. And I think the filmmakers knew what it would mean for the black hero to, first of all, be a hero, and second of all, be killed at the end. They did know, and I have evidence that I pile up in the book that insists that I think they did know to a certain degree, despite what they would go on to say for decades, that, oh, he was just the best actor, which he was. And we didn't think about race at all. But that's not true. It's just not true. The statements they made in the aftermath of making it just tell you that that was not entirely the case. Dwayne Jones, though, he knew exactly what was up. He knew what it meant to be in this role. He knew what it meant to be the person who punches out Barbara and then punches out Harry. He knew what it meant when they had this idea that he was going to die by saving Barbara. He knew that that was a bad idea. He knew what it would mean when he was shot. So I think it was a combination of all those things. But, and this is not original to my book. This is a pretty famous story. But they finished the film.
Yeah,
They only
I was about to do this. Yeah.
they only shot the one ending, so they wouldn't be tempted to change it. Which, of course, the first deal they got offered, I think, with Universal, they were like, "We'll buy the movie if you change the ending," and they didn't do it. Um, but yeah, so they're taking the print to New York. On the drive, they get the hero of the radio that Martin Luther King has been shot, and here they are just about to show this movie that has this heroic black man who gets assassinated by the end. It's funny that the movie begins with calling the zombies assassins, but really, the only person who gets assassinated is Ben by these people who clearly could have seen he was a human being. In fact, he's holding a gun when he gets shot, so the zombies don't hold guns. Anyway, it's I think a lot of it was intentional indeed. It just was more powerful than they thought. I think if anyone else plays that role, besides Dwayne Jones, it doesn't become that powerful. Like it's going to inherently always have a certain power. But he elevated that role to such a degree that it's heartbreaking. And it's not that he's assassinated; it's the offhandedness. Like you said, we've seen other, like, people in horror movies, heroes die. But when I was on tour for Partially Devoured, and most of my stops, we showed Night of the Living Dead, every night, half the audience wouldn't have seen it before. It's always surprised me. And every night when Ben gets shot, gasps. Doesn't matter how many heroes now we've seen die in horror films, just gasps all around. Imagine, if you mentioned Texas Chainsaw Massacre, imagine the last shot of Texas Chainsaw when Sally Hardesty's in the truck and she's essentially escaped, and the truck is driving away from a Leatherface. Imagine if that truck suddenly gets T-boned by a car, and Sally Hardesty dies, you know, and we're just like, that's so cruel. That has nothing to do with the struggle they've just been through. It's like that, except on purpose. Like, it's crushing because it's so cavalier.
It really is, but it's underscore. It's funny. The only parts of this film that I have trouble looking at are those stills that they
Yeah,
sort of animate at the credits. It's the only part of the movie where I'm like, I kind of want to just turn it off now
yeah.
because I don't like seeing it because it's too real. But and we'll wrap up with this because I want to get your take on it. But another way that I'm like, they knew what they were doing, even if it was just sort of that artistic subconscious thing, because before Ben is shot, like the way that the Night of the Living Dead ends is everyone else is dead. Ben is the only human left on screen, the only living, breathing human being alive. So essentially, it is his farmhouse now.
Yeah.
And the movie ends. First of all, he spends a big chunk of the first act arguing with Harry over we should we should stay upstairs and we'll have a fighting chance. No, we should be in the cellar, boarded in so they can't get in, and that way there's only one way in and out. He is forced into the cellar. He is forced to do what Harry wanted him to do all along because the ghouls overwhelm the farmhouse. So one of the last shots in the movie is Ben hiding in the cellar while a bunch of white people trample his house.
Hmm.
And I had never put that together before, and it still haunts me just seeing like the way, because this is another thing, is like the process of Romero zombies would change over the course of the movies, in part because like the timeline would go further out, so they were more rotted, but they look so human. They
Yeah.
don't like they look like neighbors. They don't look like I'm a monster who's going to eat you. They look like the weird lady down the street with the wild shock of
Yep. And
hair.
most of them literally were
Yeah.
neighbors. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild, and you make this point in the book about how much those images still work in terms of 21st century America. And I was going to bring up the Martin Luther King thing if you didn't, because I remember hearing George say that in an interview, and I was so like, oh my gosh, that may have talked me out of releasing the movie at all. Like the idea
Yeah.
that had suddenly happened. We talked about this a little in the Fangoria piece, but I kind of want to end in talking about George and how he processed the legacy. I asked Jeff about this, I asked Suze about this, I asked you about this. And obviously we can't speak for George because he's no longer here, but knowing that you just made this socially conscious horror film that ends with a black man being shot in the head, and then knowing that you're releasing it into the climate of the late 1960s when Martin Luther King had just been shot, Malcolm X was going to die, Bobby Kennedy was going to die, all of those things were about to happen, and then here's this movie that carries through all of that. What do you think that did to him creatively that echoes through later Romero stuff, and particularly later Living Dead stuff?
Yeah. I think it emboldened him in the best of ways. I think I know he saw the effect that ending had on people. And the effect that when it was in the script stage, the effect was primarily just meant to be like, whoa, what a surprise, everyone's died. But certainly once the movie in a few years after release started gaining like critical momentum in France, and then that kind of ported over here, he saw the effect that ending had, and how many people sort of rallied around the importance of the ending. And I think when it came to making his other movies, and certainly when it came to making his other zombie movies, he kept that very much in mind. He was like, this is resonating with people. I'm going to make sure that my next movies have lead characters who are women and minorities and all those things. Stymied only when he got to Land of the Dead, and he wasn't allowed to. He wanted to cast a black lead and just wasn't allowed to, which is wild. But true. Um, so I think it provided him a little leeway, a little bit of license to feel like I'm on the right track. I had no reason to believe that people were going to pick up on some of the things I was laying down, but they did. And they found it important as I found it important, and I should keep going in that direction. And boy, he never let up.
Yeah.
You may, right away with his third film, Season of the Witch, he's doing it again. Like there's an alternate universe where Dwayne Jones doesn't cast, Ben is played by a white actor. Uh, let's pretend the movie still is a success. Where George doesn't go in the direction he does. He goes on to make sort of movies that are maybe even more successful in a commercial sense, but don't have that edge. And I think we got we all got very lucky when people responded as they did. Like the world sort of didn't let him down. And he, in response, decided not to let us down.
Boy, if the last hour hasn't convinced you to go buy a copy of Partially Devoured, I don't know what will, everybody. But You definitely should go do that. Partially Devoured is on sale now, and the Whale Fall movie will be in theaters this October. Our guest has been the always wonderful Daniel Kraus. Daniel, before we let you go, will you let everyone know where they can find you online?
Yeah, danielkraus.com is your one-stop shop.
All right, danielkraus.com, everybody. Daniel, always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for being back on the show.
You got it, man. Anytime.
Thanks once again to Daniel Kraus for being on the show. It is always wonderful to talk with him. It was especially great to talk to him about Night of the Living Dead, a film that he emanates such passion for. Obviously, he wrote a whole book about it, but it was just a joy to really dig deep with him there. And congratulations to Daniel on his Pulitzer Prize. I don't know if some of you didn't hear about that yet, but yeah, Daniel won a Pulitzer for Angel Down, his one-sentence World War I fantasy horror survival novel that is brilliant, one of the most brilliant things I've ever read in any genre. So congratulations to Daniel. Go see Whale Fall when it comes out. Go pick up Daniel's next book when it's out. And go follow him on social media to keep track of everything he has going on besides winning Pulitzer Prizes. And if you want to keep track of everything that we have going on, the easiest way to do that is to follow us on Blue Sky. We are at scareshapedus.bsky.social. Over there, that is where you will find new guest announcements every episode we do, giveaways, other stuff that's on my mind. We appreciate you following us over there. You can also find us under The Scares That Shaped Us on Facebook, and we are The Scares That Shaped Us on YouTube. If that is how you prefer to listen to your podcast, head over there, like, and subscribe. If you like the show, please tell your friends about us. And if you have the time and the motivation, head over to the podcasting platform of your choice and leave us a 5-star review. That helps us immensely to get featured on those platforms, which brings more listeners in, which hopefully lets us keep doing this thing that I love doing and will do forever if y'all let me. On a slightly more personal note, I have a new short story out this week. If everybody wants to go listen to some fiction that I wrote, my story, The Stream, is the lead-off story in this week's episode of the No Sleep podcast. That's season 24, episode 15, if you're not actually listening to this the week it goes up. I'm so grateful to them for a wonderful adaptation, for handling the story with care and love and giving it a really, really scary treatment. It was wonderful to hear it. The Stream is on the No Sleep podcast, season 24, episode 15. Hope you go check it out. I may have some other short story news coming for you in the near future. That is it for us this week. We will be back next week with another brand new episode. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. I'm Matthew Jackson, and this is The Scares That Shaped Us.